Since both Cleomenes and Dorius were now dead, the throne then passed to the next eldest son of King Anaxandridas. And yes, you guessed it, that was Leonidas. We don't know much about Leonidas's reign since he barely got to do anything before the Persian Empire made a second attempt to invade Greece around 480 BCE. Unlike the first Persian attempt to take over Greece 10 years prior, which was stopped in its tracks by the Athenians and their Plataean allies at the famous Battle of Marathon, this invasion was being personally led by a Persian king, which meant it was a lot more serious. So serious, in fact, that a lot of Greek city-states capitulated or stayed neutral early in the war rather than risk the Persians' wrath. In fact, out of about 1,000 or so city-states, only around 30 were fully committed to stopping the Persians. Luckily, those city-states included plucky Athens and her brand new giant navy, and the unsmiling super soldiers of Sparta. Together, these two city-states led their allies north to the far edges of Greece to try and block a Persian advance. They first thought to stop the Persians at a place called Tempe, but when the terrain proved too difficult to defend, the Greeks decided to make a stand further south at a place called Thermopylae, which means hot gates, and is so named because of the hot spring in the area. And as we know, King Leonidas would go on to die heroically during the ensuing battle that took place there. Bonus lesson! Now, if you're wondering why Leonidas and his famous last stand at Thermopylae has been so celebrated for the past 2,500 years, it's because the odds were so incredibly stacked against the Greeks. Compared to the 7,000 or so men standing with Leonidas, King Xerxes of Persia rolled in with no less than 100,000 men. But the Greeks were smart and chose to confront the invading forces in a narrow pass wedged between the mountains and the sea. That forced the Persian army to break off into smaller numbers and try to funnel their way through this teeny tiny pass, being blocked by a wall of really angry Greek soldiers. Thus, thanks to their brilliant positioning and a literally stubborn refusal to budge, Leonidas and his allies were able to stave off the Persian army for 2 whole days. Meanwhile, the Persian navy was also being successfully checked at nearby Artemisium, thanks to the Athenians and their leader Themistocles. He's my bae. We'll talk about him in a future podcast. Naturally, King Xerxes was unhappy about all of this, but on the 3rd day his luck would change. The Greeks were betrayed by a local man named Ephialtes, who showed the Persians a way around Leonidas's position in the pass. This allowed the Persians to completely surround their enemies. Learning of the betrayal and needing to come up with a plan fast, Leonidas dismissed most of the Greek army before Xerxes arrived, so they could escape and live to fight another day. But he ordered his hand-picked bodyguard of 300 Spartans, all of their slaves, and a few soldiers from nearby city-states to stand their ground. Now, Leonidas knew staying behind meant almost certain death, but he also knew he had to do it. Perhaps because he had heard the prophecy from the oracle at Delphi, claiming that during the Persian invasion, Sparta would either have to lose one of its kings or be utterly destroyed. And like a good Spartan, once he realized the position he was in, Leonidas chose his city-state over his own life. Or maybe he knew staying behind and acting as a shield for the retreating Greek army was just the right thing to do. Or maybe, as some scholars now believe, it wasn't quite the fatalistic last stand it's always been portrayed as. Let me know if you want me to do a deeper dive into the Battle of Thermopylae in a future podcast. But no matter what his reasons, Leonidas's actions were not in vain. This noble sacrifice allowed the Greek allies just enough time to evacuate their cities, pull back their army and navy, and regroup at a more strategic location in the Straits of Salamis near Athens. It was at Salamis that the Greeks won a spectacular naval victory over the Persians and changed the entire momentum of the war. And so Leonidas died a true hero, and by the way, now we know why it's such a big deal for Alexios and Kassandra to be related to him. But the war with Persia was far from over, and that meant Sparta needed a new Aegeid king to take up the fight against the invader. But who would that be?